Caleb Mercer had turned down every woman within 50 miles of Red Mesa, and folks had learned to stop asking why. Some said he was cold. Others said he was broken. Caleb didn't correct them. He just worked his land, fixed his fences, and kept to himself the way a man does when solitude feels safer than hope. Women had come in all forms, young ones with nervous smiles and older ones with practical offers, widows who knew how to cook and girls who dreamed of changing him. He listened politely, removed his hat, and said no every time. Not unkindly, just final. A wife meant roots, expectations, something to lose. Caleb had already buried enough of that. His ranch sat where the desert began to bite back, wind-scarred earth, stubborn cattle, and a sky so wide it made a man feel small if he let it. He liked it that way. The land asked for sweat, not promises. The knock came just before dusk, when the clouds rolled low and copper-colored, heavy with rain. Caleb frowned. Nobody came out this way unannounced, not unless they were lost or desperate. When he opened the door, the storm wind rushed in first. Then he saw her. She stood straight despite the rising wind. Her dark hair braided neatly down her back. Her dress marked her as Apache, worn but cared for. Her face carried grief without apology. A young boy clutched her hand, eyes wary, ribs sharp beneath his shirt. "My husband is dead," she said, as if stating the weather. "The soldiers burned our camp." Caleb stiffened. Trouble followed stories like that. "This ain't a mission," he said. "And I don't hire help." "I'm not asking for work." Her voice didn't waver. "I'm asking for shelter, just until the rain passes." The boy coughed, thin and tired. Caleb noticed the way the woman angled herself slightly in front of him, protective even in exhaustion. "I don't offer charity," Caleb said. She met his eyes then, dark, steady, unafraid. "You can say no," she replied. "Men like you always do." The words struck harder than the wind. Not angry, not pleading, just knowing. Thunder cracked overhead. Rain began to fall, sudden and hard. Caleb hesitated, jaw tight, a war playing out behind his eyes. Finally, he stepped aside. "One night," he said. "There's a bunkhouse out back." She nodded once. "That's enough." As she passed him, he caught the faint scent of smoke and desert sage. Caleb watched the door close behind them, unease settling in his chest. He told himself it was just the storm, but deep down, he knew better. Caleb slept poorly that night. The sound of the rain, drumming against the roof, and the unfamiliar presence on his land stirring. Something restless in him. By dawn, the storm had eased, leaving the desert dark and slick, the air sharp with the smell of wet earth. He expected to find the woman and the boy gone, moving on before daylight the way most trouble did. They weren't. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney. When Caleb stepped outside, he saw her kneeling by the fire pit, coaxing a flame from damp wood with steady patience. The boy sat nearby, wrapped in a blanket, watching her hands as if they held the whole world together. "You don't have to do that," Caleb said. She looked up calmly. "Fire keeps the cold away." He didn't argue. He rarely did. Her name was Nalin. She offered it only after he'd asked twice, as though names were things not to be handed out lightly. She didn't ask his in return. That suited him fine. She took note of the land, the cattle, the way the wind cut through the ravine, all without comment. By mid-morning, she'd patched a torn water bag and cleaned the bunkhouse better than it had been in years. Caleb told himself to keep his distance. Shelter was shelter, nothing more. He laid out his rules plainly. They would stay until the ground dried, then move on. No expectations, no questions about his past, no talk of staying longer. Nalin listened, nodding once. "I understand." But understanding didn't stop her from working. She cooked with quiet skill, turning simple beans and salt pork into something that tasted like care. She moved through the space as if she'd learned long ago how not to be in the way. The boy, Thomas, she finally said, trailed after Caleb when he worked the corral, silent but curious, eyes always measuring. That unsettled him more than he cared to admit. That evening, they shared a meal in strained silence. The fire popped softly. Outside, the land steamed as it dried. "You don't like being needed," Nalin said suddenly. Not accusing, just observant. Caleb's shoulders stiffened. "You don't know me." She nodded. No, but I know men who bury their hearts with their dead. His chest tightened. He stood, pushing his chair back. You're here for shelter, he said sharply. Not conversation. Nalin didn't argue. She simply returned her attention to the fire, as if she'd said nothing out of place. But later, lying awake in the dark, Caleb stared at the ceiling, her words echoing louder than the storm had. By morning, the land would be dry, and he feared, for reasons he didn't yet understand, that something in him would not be. The rain moved on, leaving the land scraped clean and raw. But Nalin and the boy stayed. Caleb told himself it was only until the trails settled, only until they found their direction again. Still, each morning he woke to the sound of movement near the bunkhouse, and each morning he felt that quiet twist in his chest he refused to name. Tension came riding in on the third afternoon. 3 men from Red Mesa appeared at the edge of the property. Horses lathered, eyes already searching for trouble. Caleb recognized them, small-town drunks with big mouths and borrowed courage. He stepped out onto the porch before they could reach the bunkhouse. "We heard you've got squatters," one of them said, grinning. "Government land don't belong to savages." Caleb didn't smile. He rested his hand on the rifle. "This is my land, and anyone under my roof answers to me." One of the men laughed, sharp and ugly. "Since when you play host to widows?" Before Caleb could answer, Nalin stepped into view. She stood tall, Tomas behind her face calm but unyielding. The men's laughter faltered. Caleb moved without thinking, placing himself between them and her. "You heard me," he said. "Right on." The standoff stretched until common sense finally won. The men spat in the dirt and turned back the way they'd come, muttering threats they didn't have the courage to keep. That night, Nalin cleaned the shallow cut on Caleb's arm where barbed wire had snagged him earlier. Her hands were steady, warm. He watched the careful way she worked, the way grief hadn't robbed her of gentleness. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "They would have left." He shrugged. Didn't feel like testing it. Silence settled between them, heavier than before. Then she looked up at him, eyes searching, not demanding. "You want a wife?" she asked, "or just shelter?" The question struck like a sudden drop in the earth. Caleb stared at the wall, at the years of solitude he'd stacked like stones around himself. "I don't want either," he said at last. Nalin studied him, then gave a small, sad smile. "That's not true," she replied. "You want both. You're just afraid of losing another grave." The words slipped past his defenses because they were spoken without cruelty. He met her gaze and saw his own pain reflected back at him, not as judgment but as understanding. For a long moment neither of them moved. The fire crackled softly. Thomas slept nearby, breathing even and sure. For the first time in years, Caleb didn't turn away from the ache in his chest. And in that stillness, something fragile and dangerous began to take root. Caleb avoided the question for days, though it followed him everywhere, into the corrals, across the open range, back into the quiet house at night. Nalin didn't press him. She went on as she had before, steady and capable, teaching Thomas to gather eggs, mending worn clothes, moving through the space with a dignity that made the place feel less empty. That more than anything frightened him. He had built his life around absence, and now it was being gently undone. On the 4th morning, he found her packing what little they owned. The sight hit him harder than he expected, a sharp pull behind the ribs. "My people are traveling north," she said, when she noticed him watching. "They sent word. Thomas needs to be among them." Caleb nodded, though his throat felt tight. "You're welcome to stay longer," he said, the words stiff, unpracticed. "Land's safer here than most places." She met his eyes. "I won't stay as something temporary," she replied. "I won't teach my son to live as a guest in a man's life." He looked past her, out at the land he'd worked for years, suddenly aware of how silent it would be without their footsteps. He thought of the nights he'd listened to the wind and called it peace, not realizing it was only loneliness in disguise. "Then don't stay as a guest," he said. She waited. Caleb drew a slow breath, every instinct screaming at him to stay guarded, to let them go, and return to the quiet he understood. Instead, he stepped closer. "Stay as my wife," he said. "Not to replace what you lost, not to forget who we were, but to build something that knows grief and lives anyway." Nalin's eyes softened, shining but steady. "We don't erase the dead," she said. "We carry them with us." "I know," Caleb replied. "I've been doing it alone too long." She reached for his hand, hesitant but certain. Thomas looked up at them, curious, hopeful. Caleb lowered himself to the boy's level. "I don't know how to be a father," he admitted. Thomas considered this, then smiled. "You can learn." The words settled deep and right. That evening, the sun sank red and wide over the ranch. Caleb stood beside Nalin on the porch, her hand warm in his. For the first time, the land didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like a beginning.